taking a look at Downfall. Now this is a prototype copy, and as such what you see here may not be what you get in the final copy. I've taken a little bit of a liberty in setting up. This is a 3-player setup, but the 3rd player has been removed so you don't have to see it. I haven't done the initial setup of the troops. I just wanted you to see an idea of how things look before the board gets a little busy. So now I'm going to go ahead and set everything up, and we'll be right back. So I've went ahead and set things up, but only for the blue player for purposes of this overview, as we really won't need to go through the trouble of setting up the other 2 players. Now this is Downfall. In this game, players are going to be trying to rebuild their civilization and provide for themselves in the wake of nuclear winter approaching because the bombs have fallen. Who dropped the bombs? Really not important at this point. We need to wake people up, gather resources, build bunkers, and get everyone food and shelter and provided for before the nuclear winter event happens at the end of the game. In addition, we're going to want to try to clean up radiation, giving us some environment points, and even maybe get some resemblance of culture back into our post-apocalyptic society. Now, the game itself does a pretty good job of explaining what each of the rounds are in a game as far as the actions that will happen in them, and for all purposes, these boards, they're rather large, and they do have some function in terms of showing you where to put cards and putting your technologies in their proper tracks, but by and far, these really are just large player aids. They'll explain to you what each of your cards will do, and they'll explain cost around the certain things that you can purchase. The game will play until this track over here advances to the end, at which point the points will be tallied up. The simplest way to explain this is simply to just go through the 5 steps of a round. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to draw a card. Now, when you draw a card, you're going to also be receiving 3 cards from the player to your right. Now, I'm just going to take the cards that I had passed here, but that's going to give me 3. I'm going to draw 1 here, and I'm also going to get the 2 that I held in my reserve. Now, if any of those cards, if any of the card that a player draws from this deck here is a winter card, then the track over here will advance by 1. And I'll explain what that means here in a minute. If you do draw one of those, you discard it and immediately draw to replace. Then, based on where this track goes, we're going to check for any pre-action events. Now, pre-action events are going to be specifically conflict and random events, the red and brown spaces of the tracker. These other 2 we'll get to in a minute. Conflict, I'll explain how it works a little later, and random events I'll explain as well. But just so you know, at this point, we will check to see if this marker has moved to or past one of them during that phase. At this point, each player is going to do a few things in terms of their cards. You're first going to choose a card that's going to be your action for this round. So I could take this Gather card, and you're going to put it face down on your discard pile. That's going to leave you 5 cards. You're going to choose 2 of them that you're going to hold in your reserve that you're going to get in your hand next time, and you're going to take 3, you're going to take them face down, you're going to put them with your token for past cards so that they will move to your player on your left at the start of the next round. Next up, players are going to simultaneously go ahead and flip over their cards. Now this is going to state what they're going to do for this round. Now typically, most people can do their actions simultaneously. In the event timing is important, you will announce that timing is important, and the order of the actions will be done based on a number on the card from lowest to highest. Now, before I explain what each of these actions do, I'm going to just continue on. So after we handle everyone doing their actions, then we're going to do post-action events. Now, post-action events are also on this track, but they're going to be this green and this one that looks like the radiation symbol. We're going to have a spoilage and a feed and possibly a fallout. Again, following the same rules of whether or not this marker has got to it or has just went past it. And I'll explain what those do after we explain the actions. Once we've checked for post-action events, then we are also going to check to make sure that any of our survivors out here can handle the radiation of the zones they're in. And that is simply on a lot of these tokens, there are radiation little shield symbols. For each one in the space there, then they will be protected from one radiation. Now, it's not that will protect one person, that will protect all survivors there from up to 1 radiation. If this, on the other hand, was 2 radiation and there was only 1 there, then those survivors would die and the player would lose victory points for each of them. After this, we go back to the beginning and go through it again. So real quick, let's go over each of the actions that are on these cards. Now the first action is the gather action, and the gather action is going to allow us to get resources. Resources exist in one of 2 states. Well, technically 3, but we'll just say 2 for the time being. They're either going to be in a raw state where they have not been collected, or they're going to be in a gathered state. If we're playing the gather, then anywhere we have survivors, we're going to get to flip over a token from its raw state to its gathered state for each survivor in that zone. So in this case, we flipped over 1 here, we have 1 survivor here, we have a survivor here, and we have 2 survivors in this zone. Now, at any point during your turn, you are allowed to move things that you have control over into storage. And we'll explain why that's important when we talk about the spoilage. The next action that we're going to have is our regrow and excavate. Now that one is going to allow us to first place a food at each of these water and farmland type areas that we have in a raw state. So the blue player here would get to put a raw token here in the water space. The next thing that we'll do on that card is excavate, and you'll get to play 1 matching raw resource for each outpost you control, which is this token right here. So in the case of this, we have an outpost here, so we could put a raw stone. We have an outpost here, so we would get a raw oil. And we have an outpost here where we would get a raw metal. The third action card that we have is Bunker. Now, Bunker allows us to do either A, B, or C, or we can do all 3. I'll explain just in a second why it's important, why you might not want to do all 3. The first thing that we can do is for everywhere we have a bunker, which is this token right here, and we have it here, we can gain 1 unequipped survivor. So we could place him here. We could gain 1 of any of these resources of oil, metal, or stone in each raw state in that zone. And we could gain 1 over here on the culture track. I'll go into culture track in a little more detail here in a few minutes. So we could do 1 of those, or we could do all 3. Now there's times we might not want to do all 3 because we might not want that extra mouth to feed. And if we choose to do all 3, we have to do all 3. The next action we have is build. Now build allows us to spend resources that from any storage space we have or any space we occupy to build things on any space we control. Now this might be a good time to explain the difference between occupy and control. Occupy simply means we are present in the space. Control means we are tied for or have more of the battle strength in there, which is this little symbol here that kind of, you can't really see, but it looks like a little explosion of sorts. So in this case, we'll look here and we'll see what the costs are. Such as an airship. We could build an airship for 1 of the metal. Now I don't see that we have any. Oh, we do. We have a metal here. So we could spend this metal to build 1 airship, perhaps right there. Now we can do as many builds as we wish as long as we have the resources to spend. Now for the purposes of clutter of the board, I'm going to not put that out for right now. But we could build airships, we could build bunkers, outposts, and we could also equip survivors. Now that turns a survivor from a regular survivor who has no protection and no battle strength to an equipped survivor who now has a battle strength and a radiation protection. However, this survivor cannot do the gather action any longer. In addition to building something, you can also spend 2 oil or 3 of anything else to remove radiation from anywhere you are or adjacent. And you can do this a number of times as long as you have the resources. So I could maybe spend this resource and let's say these 2 resources, and I could remove this radiation token. The next action we have, I'll steal from over here, is the command action. Now command action is going to do 3 things, and you can do them in any order you wish. One thing you can do is you can spend up to 2 movement points, and movement points will allow you to move airships and survivors around the board. Airships can move up to 2 spaces for 1 movement point, but they must have at least 1 survivor in them piloting it, but they can carry up to 2, and survivors can move up to 1 space. However, survivors cannot move into dead zones and they can't move into water. They can move into water if they're on an airship, though. Now, one thing to note about movement is when you're moving into an explored space, you are going to flip over that tile. You can orientate it in any way you wish, place it down, and then choose to move into it. Regardless, it's going to stop your motion, your movement, but this survivor moving in couldn't move in because this is a water space, so he would need to go back, but this space is revealed. Now, if it had not been a water space, he could have come in. In addition, you're going to add the resources to the tile. Now, this is a special tile called Polluted Waters, where we get to add 2 gathered resources to the 2 spaces in this fashion of our choice. But let's say we'd come into this one. If we orientate it this way, we would add 2 of this ungathered raw metal. In addition to that, we can also place a command token anywhere on the board that we wish, which will add 1 of our battle strength to that space. So I could maybe add 1 there. The last thing you can do in the command token is you can spend an oil to either place an additional of these command tokens or to gain an additional movement point. And you can do that as many times as you wish as long as you have the oil to support it. The final action card that we have is going to be our War and Research card. Now, our War and Research card is an either-or card. If you research, you're going to be able to implement one of these technologies onto your player board. But if it has a cost associated, you will need to pay it. So I could add these warships here and put them underneath this track here, but they will cost me a metal and an oil. But now each of my airships will contribute 1 to battle strength, which before this technology they did not. Now, these are added to your board, and they'll add additional effects to these particular actions, or just ongoing effects, or even additional storage. In addition, there is one that everyone starts with. It's called Cellular Regeneration, which allows you to spend 1 of all of these resources to gain 3 victory points. The war action allows you to initiate conflict out on the board, but only anywhere that you are involved in a conflict. It will not affect anyone else, and you can't annex. I'm not going to go too far into that right now, just because we're going to be covering conflict over on this track here in just a second. So that's going to be the action card, so let's go through the track over here. I mentioned before that some of these are post-action and some are pre-action. The pre-action events are our conflict and our random events. In conflict, you're going to check the board to see if there is first any conflict before players. If there is a conflict between players, then that means that there are going to be 2 players occupying a space who have battle strength, to both have battle strength in that space, in which case you're going to add up each of their battle strengths, and whoever has the most is going to be the victor, with the victor able to take over one of their outposts or something like that, or even kill a survivor in that zone, and then move them to a space of the winner's choosing. However, if there is no conflict on the board, then peace is achieved. And that means that everybody in the game is going to get 1 victory point for every 2 spaces they currently occupy, and they can even spend a food to round that up. The random event one, on the other hand, is going to cause a card to flip over, and it's going to cause something to happen, such as this one here, where it means for the rest of the game, each player gains 1 victory point for every new survivor he wakes during bunker actions. Each time a survivor dies for any reason, its owners lose one victory point on top of any victory point losses. Now, I expect that I'll probably see more flavor text and things and artwork on these, but these are pretty cool, and they'll add a little bit of extraness to the game as it's progressing. Now, the post-action events are these 2 here, and these happen after everyone takes their action, which is nice because it allows you to plan accordingly. The spoilage means that first, any gathered resource on the board that is not currently in storage, meaning it's not in an outpost, it's not in a bunker, it's not on an airship, which can carry 1 resource, and it's not in your cyber storage, it is removed completely from the board. And then you're going to need to feed your people. Now, some of these will provide food. This first feed gives 3 free, then 2 free, 1 free, and then no free at the end. For each survivor you have on the board, you will need to provide 1 food from your storage for each over the initial 3. So right now we have 5 survivors. we have 3 food here and we got 3, so we're good. However, if we had not had enough food, then we have a choice. We can either kill them and lose 1 victory point, or we can keep them alive and lose 2. Now that doesn't cover every little nuance, and one thing that I didn't explain is that these cards also have what's called a minor action that you can take instead of the major action. And all this is going to be is a lesser version of the minor actions, such as in the gather one, where instead of gaining once for all wall survivors who can gather, you'll only be able to choose 2 survivors who gather. And that'll just allow you a little bit extra play in terms of if you don't have the card you want on a major action. Looking over here at this track, the other thing that to note is this little environment track. As I said, when you clear radiation, you do move up 1 on it, and you gain a victory point as well. At the end of the game, there will be some additional points that I'll explain here in a second. This little culture track, however, when you move on it using this bunker, you also will gain what I'm calling a minor action. So the first time I go here, I get to do 1 regrow, so I get 1 token regrown and 1 token excavated. When I move here, I get to do 1 token gathered. Here I get a free move. Here I get a victory point. So you'll gain additional benefits from moving it. Once the game reaches all the way to the end of this track, these will all be post-action, so everyone will get 1 last action. Then we'll do a final conflict, a final fallout. I just realized that I didn't explain fallout to you guys. Fallout is this post-action event right here. Fallout, every one of these dead zones, which are zones people can't go into, is going to spread radiation around it. And so here it would spread to here, causing this to turn to a 2, this to a 2. But if these had already been a 2, then they instead would turn into dead zones themselves. That is what the fallout. Now, if a zone turns into a dead zone, that means that every token in it is immediately destroyed. In addition, let's say that this had turned into a 2. This guy is no longer protected. That means he is going to die. So we'll do that fallout, then we'll do another spoilage, another food receiving no food, and then we will do a final scoring. Now, the final scoring is going to be the points that you've acquired. You're going to have a scoring here based on who has the most. I believe in a 6-player game, it is who is furthest up the track gets 6, then 4, then 3. And we'll do the same thing over here for this track as well. So we'll get a little extra bonus here. And for every survivor we still have on the board, we'll receive an additional 2 points. We'll add in any points that might have been added from any of these random events, and whoever has the most points is the winner. So that's a look at Downfall. Now, as I said in the overview, this is a prototype copy that I show that Tasty Minstrel was kind enough to send to me. Now, this is a 4X style game, and as such, it's definitely not for everyone. I myself do enjoy these style of games, but I don't get a chance to play them as often as I'd like to. This game felt to me like something that I could convince players who normally might say no to something like TI3, and they were willing to play this game with me. The first time I played it, I did get to play it with the full complement of 6 players, and that was a little overwhelming for the first game. At the end, one person did suggest that maybe we should have done a round and then reset up, because what happens is you don't really understand the nuances in the game when you're first selecting your particular region and how you lay things out, and that can feel defeating if it's your first game once you get a few rounds in. I do think, however, that's not the best idea because the game does have a rather lengthy setup time, even though everyone's doing it simultaneous, and once you've got the hang of it, I think that would be fine, but that kind of is counterpoint to the fact that it's nice to do it the first time you play. So the game does have in the rule book, or rather will have in the rule book, a beginner layout on the map that we didn't have access to that I think would have really helped us. The thing I like about this game is that this game is the sort of thing that's going to get better each time you play it. once everyone understands the nuances and the way things work and how you need to arrange your resources, the game is going to get better. The artwork in the game I really, really like. Everything feels thematic and everything fits into the theme and the mechanisms here as the game progresses. Now, the only problem I did have with it was components, but I do believe that was due to the prototype copy, and so I'm going to reserve judgment until I see that a little more in the final copy. One downside I had in the game, and honestly I have it with a lot of these style games, is the fact that while this game doesn't really have a player elimination, you can eliminate yourself. I myself in the first game, about halfway through, knew that I was done for. And that held true. By the end of the game, I actually ended in negative points on the whole. But I still enjoyed this experience. I still continued playing like I wasn't eliminated. But you do need to be aware of what's going on at all times. This game can be punishing, but it's punishing when you're not paying attention. For example, in the first game we played, I didn't pay attention to the radiation, and what ended up happening is a dead zone formed where I had most of my people at, and I lost almost everything. But that was kind of my fault in this, because the game really does give you a chance to see what is going to happen soon, and you can prepare for it. You shouldn't find yourself constricted by the spoilage or things like that because you prepare for it in advance. So while, again, the game can be punishing, it can be mitigated by just better play, which you will get better each time you do. Another thing that I really did enjoy in this game is the technologies that you can add on, and it adds to the sense of theme in terms of rediscovering technologies that were lost in this nuclear fallout. And that really helps to create some asymmetry between the players as the game progresses, and you have to make those decisions. And especially since you're only getting to do one action each turn, each action that you make, including buying those technologies, really needs to play into your long-term strategy. I also enjoyed how you're always passing 3 cards to the next player, in that you're feeding their hand with cards that you think won't benefit them, but you're allowed to hold a couple cards that you think might benefit you, depending on what cards you're receiving yourself. And that was a nice little addition to the game that I don't think was completely necessary, but really works in this, and it allows your deck to kind of change over time, almost in a deck building feel, but in a way that you're not controlling completely yourself. Overall, I really did enjoy this game, despite the hiccups that we had the first time we played it, but again, each time got better. For fans of this genre of game, in terms of like a 4X style game, or even maybe lighter Civ games, you may find a game here that you really, really enjoy. If you haven't got your feet wet into these style of games, this might be a great game to get your feet wet with if the theme is something that seems interested to you. I like that whole post-apocalyptic thing, so this is something that appealed to me. I hope that you've enjoyed this look at TMG's upcoming title, Downfall, and I look forward to seeing you folks next time.